No mai haere mai. Ko Shannon Dowsing tōku ingoa. Welcome to the Exchange Cafe. At the Exchange Cafe, we come together to share conversations and resources about climate solutions. We're fortunate to have Manu Caddie in the studio with us today. Manu, no stranger. He has been campaigning for better outcomes in Te Tairawhiti for as long as I've known him. Manu, welcome. Kia ora. Thank you for coming in. And do you want to tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your current mahi?
Sure. So, Ngāti Pukenga, Ngāti Haua oku iwi. But at the moment, well, for the last 8 years, I've lived under the shadow of Hikurangi Maunga on my wife's land at Makarika, just south of Ruatoria. And before that, we were in Gisborne for 15 years or so. So, yeah, so 25 years in Tairawhiti, having grown up in Tauranga. Yeah, studied in Wellington, but been here for half my life now. So turned 50 this year, and
No, you didn't.
I did, and I love Tairawhiti. It's you know, sort of, but also I'm thinking, yep, 25 years. It's a good stint. Not that we're moving anywhere. I think, you know, we're sort of where we live is it's the centre of Tasha's universe, and we'll be there as long as we can be. But I also feel like Tairawhiti is probably a bit over me and need to give it a break. So yeah, have other things elsewhere. Sort of probably middle of next year, kind of. People will hear a lot less from me in the newspaper and things.
That's a shame. I think you underrate yourself. A lot of us think very highly of you, Manu.
Oh, yeah, sort of. I think everyone's got the message from me, so there's not that much more to say, and yeah, leave you to it. But you know, we're very committed to the block that we live on. It's 130 hectares of Māori land, and feel like that would be a lifetime of work just trying to kind of what we're doing there, transitioning it from pasture to natives, and it's going to be a long-term project that we won't see the results of in our lifetime, but that's something that we're moving on with now, and want to spend quite a bit of time on that going forward.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a saying that I quite like, which is plant a tree under whose shade you'll never sit, which is I think the concept of longevity of our actions is something that we've got to get really familiar with. So look, it's been a full-on year in Te Tairawhiti, obviously. Still communities hurting from the cyclones and ongoing weather pressures. The industry here is certainly changing. You can see it with the road volumes, and even a change towards attitude of what we should be doing in region. For you, highlights, lowlights, what's your 2023 been like?
Yeah, obviously, I guess it's been dominated by the cyclones at the start of the year, with Halle and Gabrielle in January and February, and everything since then has, you know, sort of been in reference to those events. And so they, you know, I think they were, particularly Gabrielle, and the destruction there was a big low light for everybody, and the kind of ongoing challenge that's been physically and economically and mentally and things for the region. It's been the big low light, and but at the same time, that crisis, that disaster really brought the community together in a way that we maybe haven't seen for a long time, if ever, and so some really positive things came out of it.
Tell me about that a little bit more. What specifically, like, I know I saw, you know, a lot around the volunteer action, but in your community, what did you find was?
Yeah, I think we saw people coming together to connect and support each other right during the crisis and things, with items and equipment, generators and, you know, Skylinks and Starlinks and food and things, but also a real kind of sense of community and looking out for each other, and people talking that maybe hadn't talked before but only lived down the road and things, and a bit of collective planning and action as well, I think. So that's stuff that, we hadn't done before, and unfortunately sometimes it takes that kind of crisis to mobilise us into connecting, but also into appreciating the challenges that we face, bigger than anyone can really control, and we're going to need to work together to look after each other going forward and look after those things that we think are important. So those were positives that came out of that unfortunate set of circumstances that we found ourselves in at the start of the year, I think. Having said that, I think there was also a lot of stress caused and a breakdown in some relationships. I think we've seen that at the regional level with some of the way that the certain leaders talked about each other, and kind of the disconnect in some of the collaborations that had happened, especially during COVID, and some of the stuff set up there. I just think the pressure on everybody at the time was immense, but it's also been at the community level. I've heard of marae, next door to each other, where the whānau aren't talking to each other anymore because those fellas got food packs and we didn't, and those sort of things. So I think but we can't afford to have that kind of disconnect going forward, and we're going to need to really sort of prioritise relationships and maintaining healthy relationships, getting good at mending bridges, not just physically but relationally as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's kind of some of my lowlights of the year were around some of those. Certainly the mental health stresses are put on families, communities, businesses, everything. But then also one thing that really frustrated me was the logistics and not having guidance for logistics around what was going on. So we were receiving tons and tons of food product into region, which was coming in just as donations on random trucks. And then I remember being involved in a merry-go-round where we're trying to redistribute like tons of potatoes, and they went and we literally tried to get them somewhere, and they ended up saying, "Yeah, we'll take them all." And their purpose was to take them and then drop them back at the place that was trying to redistribute them. And so I think there's some lessons to be learned about both our personal relationships and also how we deal with events of that scale, and nationally, not as it can't be one marae that's going to create a logistics platform for civil defence, for community action and civil defence. So that kind of stuff is where I see.
One of my concerns is that I don't know the lessons maybe haven't been learned or taken on board as much as they need, and I think we all need to kind of test, particularly those entities with responsibilities for supporting communities in crisis, and just see how much things have changed for the better or not. I sort of we've had a number of weather events since those cyclones, and I know this, they were overwhelmed, those agencies and individuals during and since really with the recovery, but it feels like we haven't still got the, as you're pointing out, that particular issue, logistics, the civil defence emergency system even, and kind of who's taking care of who in these situations is still not clear to me. And so I think while they've been busy in recovery, we also, as residents, need good communication and good coordination and clarity, because that wasn't there before the cyclones, and I still feel like sort of there's still some big gaps in my knowledge, and I think in many people's around what to do and who to expect to hear from and those sort of things. So,
and I think it goes beyond the agencies, right? Civil defence has X amount of capacity, and then the military came in and expanded that capacity, but they were running their own program as well.
Yeah.
And then, but actually, and then you'd end up with a volunteer workforce which is greater than the sum of both, with no supportive planning, policy, documentation to help that structure. So who takes responsibility for helping organise that? Because I can be pretty sure from past experience that if you try to walk in there with a whole bunch of plans for them, they'll be like, well, you didn't do it last time. How do you know? You know?
Yeah.
So how do we, so resourcing the community side. Is
supporting the
really
volunteers.
important. Yeah, 2023, what a year.
Yeah, we'll all be happy to see the end of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been playing a lead role in some major responses to the cyclone, and primarily I'm thinking about the inquiry into the land use in Tairāwhiti. Massive community and expert submission into the inquiry process. What are your views on the resulting report, and where has it ended up, and where's it going to go?
Yeah, it was that petition we organised happened after the first cyclone in January, and the day before, the night before, we presented it to council. You know, a couple of weeks after we opened it, and it got nearly 10,000 supporters. And you know, young Oliver was killed on the beach by a freshly cut log, and I think that kind of set the tone for council's support, strong support of our requests for tighter rules around land use in the region, a review of those rules, and an independent inquiry into what's going on with land use in the region, and the need for a just transition plan to move us beyond those unsustainable land practices. So that was all positive. It got to central government, and the ministers, I think, for a while were not equivocating, but were certainly had some strong local voices in their ears that it should just be a locally led inquiry, and we didn't really need outside independent views on it, on what was going on. Fortunately, in particular, I've got to give credit to Kiritapu Allen. She ensured that we did get the message very clearly to the ministers that we wanted to see an independent inquiry. And I think we got that by and large. And the report was, or the process, you know, I felt for the panel that the process was very truncated. I could see the government wanted to get it done and out the door before the election, sort of well before that. They maybe saw the writing on the wall. They might not be around much longer. But as a result, I think we probably didn't get as good a process and therefore outcome in the content of the report as we might have if it had been given a bit longer for community to really engage properly, and for the panel to test the claims and things that different groups were making. But anyway, we got what we got, and that was good. And there were a number of really strong recommendations in the report that we were really pleased with, well aligned with the submission that we'd organised on behalf of Manatai o Tairāwhiti. And the government, so there were 49 recommendations in there, a lot around land use, a lot around other things that we felt were way outside the scope of the report, but you know, so be it. And
like the biodiversity credits and that kind of
or things like the barge at Charitable and things which sort of like somehow loosely related, but and then in a lot around, you know, when Hekia went around the road shows, she said it's this isn't a Gabrielle inquiry or sort of a recovery inquiry, but looking at the recommendations, a lot of them were about the roading infrastructure and things which were not about land use per se. You know, we're talking really about farming and forestry practices in the region and what we're going to do about that. So anyway, we got a number of really good recommendations, a number of ones a bit outside the box, outside the scope from our perspective, but some good, strong ones. And so looking to the government response, and they had a bit of an interim response, so the officials did their sort of line by line kind of review, and then the minister came, David Parker, I think, got COVID the day before they were due to come and present to the community, so it was left up to Pēne Henare. And I was very disappointed in that that meeting and the response we got from him, partly because he said things like he understood that natives don't grow well in the region. It's like, what are you talking about, man? My response was they did for 40 million years, but he really, and unfortunately what they did in that meeting was they only picked 4 sort of responses that they were making as a government. Or actually, when they sort of put out the media release later in the day, there were quite a few others in there, including things like changing the national rules around plantation forests. So that was a bit unfortunate PR, sort of who was managing their comms, I don't know. But anyway, there were some good responses in there, but they said that they would, Cabinet would have a formal, full response before Christmas, by the end of the year. And unfortunately, the government has changed in terms of that process, and we wait to see what the new government response will be to those recommendations. The officials are still there, hopefully, doing their work, and Dana Kirkpatrick, have had some conversations with her since the election and seen the sort of official responses of the new government, and they seem positive. And I was worried that they wouldn't take the situation seriously in the region, and I think again there's a tension between the recovery needs of the region and the bigger, longer term land use ones, and I'm not sure the new government is fully over those nuances, but Dana's been here for a long time and understands those issues well, hopefully, and I'm feeling confident that we'll get a good hearing from her and her colleagues in the government, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah, obviously the 100-day plan is only highlighting recovery at the moment, so we still wait to see when and where we'll start to discuss resilience, and when and where we'll start to discuss economic transition, and it's a hard one. I don't want to think that our focus for the next however many years is going to stay on trying to recover the status quo.
Yes. Yeah, and it's unfortunate, things like the Minister for the Environment for the first time, I think, is outside of Cabinet, which is bizarre, but and so is the Minister for Climate Change, which doesn't give me a lot of hope in that sense. But Todd McClay's the Minister for Forestry, so I'm interested to see how he responds, and we'll just have to wait and see. But in the meantime, I think there's lots that the region can get on with anyway around those issues, and we're seeing council being proactive and putting forward some changes to the rules at last that were way too permissive, and doing a process to look across the region at which parts of the region are suitable for what activities. It's part of the core role, and I feel bad that when I was on there we didn't do more around that, and it's also, I think we need to get to the hectare level, kind of what's suitable, because even within a valley or a catchment there's going to be vastly different geologies and topographies and things, and erosion susceptibility. I'm also a little fearful that there's some good people in council, but they've been there a long time and have worked through a system that's seen pine as a really positive thing for the land. As we saw, farming is very positive, and in many ways both of those things are good in the right place, and it's my concern is that people with fresh eyes might see things quite differently to someone who's assumed that those things are generally pretty okay, and there's just sort of a bit of tweaking in sort of a few areas that we really need to pull out, when actually if 88% of the region's erosion prone and over half of that is high and very high susceptibility, actually, at least half of the region needs to be into permanent native as quickly as we can. And looking at some of the recent research on those gully systems that have opened up, there's some of them we never, even with permanent natives, we're not going to stop those. So
just another Tarndale slip waiting to happen, right?
Yeah, all over. There's 1,000 of them, around the region that we're losing the battle on. So,
yeah. And if you see what it does to, the in town here,
Yeah, and I think that's, again, in the
outcomes.
Yes, the report really did focus on forestry, but we wanted the focus to be on land use, and so sediment is a massive issue, and if I felt like the farming community got off the hook a bit, or and it's not their fault. It's just the rules that have been set and the assumptions that we've made. We've got to have some radical change to that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, right? It's just it's the science of the time that's led our decisions, and we're getting to the point where it just needs a reset because we've gone so far down manipulating our rules that they're no longer appropriate anyway. But I agree that the report itself did focus heavily on forestry, not land use, and I hope that they do start introducing, like using land overlay, for example, to determine planting instead of using block characteristics. And we all know we have better data to make those determinations from. And I'm like yourself, disappointed that in my time on council I didn't make a bigger impact too. But I think that's probably how you always come out of council. So I understand you and a number of Tairāwhiti locals have been involved with a project called Recloaking Papu. It's being promoted by Pure Advantage. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
So Pure Advantage is a group of prominent New Zealanders, some would say wealthy white men, but who want to do something really good with what they've got available, which is a platform and some resources, and they've got really good track record of bringing people together to talk about particularly climate change, but also land use and biodiversity. So Stephen Tyndall, Rob Morrison, Philip Mills, and Jeff from 42 Below. Some of them, but our Anne Salmon is on there as well, and another guy called Andy Grant. And they are New Zealanders who care passionately about the country and are trying to do something both with government and with civil society and business to challenge some of those assumptions, some of the trajectory that we're on, and encourage us to address some of those sustainability issues that sometimes feel a bit too hard. So Recloaking Papu is the latest initiative, and that's what it's come down to. And there were a few, I was sort of part of some of the early discussions and some of the options being explored, but what it's come down to is really putting the focus on New Zealand's what they call nationally determined commitments, which are international commitments that New Zealand has made to reducing emissions or reducing greenhouse gas production, consumption emissions, and in the path we're on, because we haven't been reducing emissions fast enough, doing our bit in the world, we are needing to sequester more of the carbon in the atmosphere to try and balance the books, and that's why we've seen a big proliferation in pine plantations across the country, because the government again saw carbon sequestration as a way to address the problem of not being able to transition or not wanting to transition the economy fast enough from a high carbon economy to a low emission economy. And so this initiative focuses on the liability that New Zealand has between what we've said we'll do and what we are doing, which will either need to be met by planting the whole country in pine trees and sequestering, and even then the Climate Change Commission says we don't have enough land to do that, or purchasing credits offshore by getting other countries to either plant trees or introduce renewable energy to reduce their emissions and things. And so the idea is that New Zealand would pay another country to do these activities, and that of course is unacceptable for most taxpayers. I think they'd rather we spent those funds, if we have to, on stuff that's going to happen in Aotearoa. So a portion of those funds is, so the Treasury's estimated that it's going to cost between 3 and 26 or 28 billion to meet that commitment by 2030, and so that's only 6 years away.
I like the sound of 3.
Yeah,
that sounds achievable.
Depends a bit on, obviously it depends on the trajectory and sort of how quickly we can cut emissions, but it's also a lot to do with the carbon price, and that, as we know, fluctuates quite a bit. But it's looking like sort of somewhere around 15 billion is probably what the taxpayer is going to have to front up with. And then one of the big issues is that no government's wanted to put that liability on the books yet. So all of a sudden, some government's going to have to accept that that's coming, and hopefully this government recognises it and agrees to put it on the books. But that means that there's a bigger hole in the current government's budget if they do that. So this Recloaking Papu is saying, hey, there's 2.1 million hectares of land that we could be investing in that could rapidly sequester carbon by both protecting existing native bush. So about 3/4 of that is looking at public and private forests like the Rokumura and Graham Atkins and the awesome project there, being a way to fund that in an ongoing way. And the other is sort of 600,000 hectares of low productivity farmland, like much of what we've got in Tairāwhiti, that people are struggling to make ends meet around, and saying, hey, why don't we pay for the conversion? So we'll pay for pest control and for fencing and for planting or reversion, natural reversion. But we'll also pay the landowners something so that they are not going to lose out on, if they'd carried on with sheep and beef farming, we can reassure them that, they're not going to be out of pocket, and use those funds for that purpose.
So if their land is contributing to the requirements of New Zealand's commitments, they would be earning an income by delivering those. Yeah,
so it's a voluntary thing. It's not sort of grabbing land and nationalising it or anything. It's saying, if you want to do this, there's some funding there. And I'm really interested because I think, a lot of, particularly Māori land, not many whānau rely on their dividend from the land that they might be shareholders in to put food on the table. And most would much, I think, and again we need the research and the evidence built around it, but I think most would prefer to see a beautiful native forest re-established on that land for their mokopuna, with some opportunities to create jobs around that in pest control and planting and maintaining those forests to ensure that the carbon is retained. The stuff, the green jobs, the jobs for nature that the Rokumura Paemaunga project has been showing how well, and many others around the region and different catchments have been doing. So that's what the project's about. It's really just a very high level concept that these guys, as Pure Advantage, can't fund themselves. And
there's some names on there that could fund themselves.
Yeah, but maybe. I don't know if we've got any billionaires that wealthy even in New Zealand, but maybe Graham Hart. So it will need some government support. There may be a way of including private funders in there, but at the moment there's not a huge incentive for companies to be contributing to biodiversity in the way that they need to for carbon at present.
Yeah. So who's going to, and this is, I don't know if you'll know this or not, but who will be valuing the carbon sequestration of native? And will they be looking at, like, this is Tier A native versus Tier C native, this has got high levels of pest control, we've got great undergrowth, we've got, multi-levels of flora, like how are we going to quantify that? Because obviously, the pine ratio doesn't work out. You don't just go stems per hectare.
Yeah, Tāne's Tree Trust actually is the other partner that initiated Recloaking Papu, and they're a charity that has a lot of forestry scientists as part of it, and they've been doing some great work on building the evidence base around carbon sequestration in trees, and not just in the tree themselves, but in the soil underneath them and in wetlands and all those sort of things. And so there's some better methodologies being developed, and not just them, but ones like Manaki Whenua, Crown Research Institute have been doing quite a lot on that. Scion have been doing a little, not as much as they should. So there's these methods that are being developed that can be much more accurate and generous than what the default has been, which has been these lookup tables that MPI's relied on, which really undervalues the carbon sequestered in Indigenous forest. And likewise, Forest and Bird done some good work on when we protect old growth forest and get rid of the predators, we see an abundance of carbon being sequestered because the trees can actually grow instead of die. And so those methods are there. There's audit organisations that can come and tell you sort of what the sequestration of your block is based on measuring trees, and we're getting some pretty good data from satellites and things now, but nothing like sort of ground truthing it and proving that it is doing it by actually measuring some stuff. And then I guess ones like Toha are there with their mechanisms for validating that biodiversity action, and so we'll just, I guess, see a proliferation of groups that are available to help evidence and provide certainty and transparency around the measurement of those outcomes.
You've been involved with Te Wū since its inception. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the work happening under that banner, and what else is coming up for it?
Yeah, it was, so Te Wū Charitable Trust is a little charitable trust we set up sort of last year, thinking it was the start of last year, and a friend of mine, we were on a drive up the coast, and he said, who's thinking about climate change, who's doing anything about land use and things in the region? And so yeah, there's a few groups around, and some organisations that probably should be but don't do much or don't do enough. And I just kept thinking about that, and was like, okay, we should set up something. And we got a little bit of funding to do some work around carbon farming, which had been a hot topic in the region with the transition of many farms to pine plantations. And we were particularly interested in the impacts on families that work in forestry and farming. So I undertook that project, but as we went around sort of raising those questions and looking at the scenarios that were before the region, we'd had the weather events in March last year, and we'd had ongoing events every year, and people that had been impacted by particularly the floods in March 2022 were really concerned about climate change impacts in the region beyond the price of carbon or the sort of transition of land to pine plantations. So we got this trust set up, and it's very small, but this year's been involved in quite a few research projects in the community, particularly post-cyclone, kind of asking residents what worked and what didn't. And one big project has been done in conjunction with Hawke's Bay, where we've ended with the University of Auckland with a focus on health services in the region and what the impacts were of the cyclone and being cut off, and what we need to do going forward to reconfigure health services in the region to make them more resilient to these sort of events that are going to be more severe and more frequent into the future, so that we've got more, I guess, self-sufficiency of health support within communities, and really at the almost that, we're going to have islands in the region where they get cut off by rivers and streams that flood. And at the same time, conversely, if we get more droughts, we're going to have less water, and people are going to find it, we may have other sicknesses and things. So I was looking at some of those scenarios. We had another project in Tokomaru Bay with a couple of rangatahi who've gone out and interviewed their whānau and neighbours, and right up into Te Puia Springs, Waipiro, and down into Hukuwai, talking to families that were affected. And again, they were cut off for the longest period there in Tokomaru Bay, and what worked and what didn't. And what are some of the challenges going forward. And another project is with the council around adaptation and looking at decision-making processes, and can we shift some of the decision-making from council to community, and how do we do that in a way that's fair and transparent and gets the politics out of some of the decisions, or at least the recommendations, and looking at the evidence. And council, to their credit, have come on board saying, I think council staff were saying we should just take them into account when we make our decisions, but the councillors said, no, let's give effect to what comes back from the community. So that project's had focus in Muriwai, Matakawa, and the disabled community in the city, looking at how things went for them during the events, but also what they're doing in terms of adaptation planning. And that will be used as evidence in citizen assemblies, they're called, where it's sort of like a jury you bring together from the community. They get presented with evidence, so these community stories and experiences, as well as science experts and policy experts from council and things. Iwi will be invited to share as well their perspectives, and marae hapu, whoever wants to present evidence to the jury, the assembly or kahui, and that group will make recommendations to council that council say they'll give effect to. And then so there's a bunch of other projects going on like that, and that's connected to and I don't know if it's got a long life, it maybe we wind it up next year, it's kind of done its thing, or actually there might be an ongoing role for something that has a bit of independence and can keep looking at land use issues, making sure those recommendations from the inquiry or other issues are addressed. And it's been it's got a legal entity there, and it's been able to support the Manatai ao Tairāwhiti, which is a much more informal group of residents, but which is also involved in litigation with forestry companies and things. So there's lots going on. So all of that research, we're like, how are we going to share it? And so we've planned a week of events on the anniversary of Gabrielle, so starting 9th of February, running through to the 16th. Which is rapidly approaching, and we're just scrambling to get organised. But these research projects are largely finished or well progressed, so there'll be stuff that we can bring to the community. So we've organised a roadshow around the villages of the region, and then a research symposium for a couple of days at the new Midway Surf Club to present the findings from the various projects to the community. We'll have some policy officials there from Wellington, and but that'll be an open invite and an opportunity to hear some of the lessons learned from that research.
Obviously, I'd love to do some coverage of that, so looking forward to it.
Look forward to having you there.
Look, you sound like the busiest man in Tairāwhiti when you tell me all these things.
And just find other people that can do them all.
Yeah. And on top of that, you've been travelling and not just attending, but speaking at conferences this year, like Degrowth and the Climate and Business Conference. What are your big takeaways from those? Because I know that a lot of people in particular, the degrowth action is really important to them, but what are your takeouts? What would you like to share?
Yeah, the degrowth movement is gaining traction here and around the world, and that's this idea of, we can't have perpetual growth on a finite planet with limited resources, and this obsession with growth has created all sorts of perverse outcomes for not just the environment, but humanity. And can we develop a different economy that doesn't need businesses to continually grow to be successful, and to find ways of moving beyond that. So that brought together a bunch of speakers and just people interested to have a wānanga for a few days in Wellington, and was really interesting. And I think there's some good opportunities to I'm interested, I guess my interest is in the business side of things, and sort of what does that look like. There's investors who are keen to invest in such things, which is, sort of feels like a contradiction. Most investors are looking for a financial return, but some of them are saying we've got money that if you can just maintain it, we would rather see other outcomes rather than financial returns. We want to see social, cultural and environmental returns, or economic development returns, but ones that don't rely on this extractive economy, but the circular one. So that's really interesting, and some good presentations. I think they're all available for free online on the Degrowth web.nz, I think it is, website. Sure we can put the link in the
description.
Yep.
Yep.
And then the Climate Change in Business Conference was interesting. That's run by the Environmental Defence Society. It has all the sustainability officers from all the big corporates, and a few CEOs and things, and quite a few politicians and policy people from Wellington there. And yeah, it was interesting. There were some big corporate players, Nestle and others, Fonterra, who presented, and I don't know, I sort of felt like it was very business as usual with a greening sort of veneer to it, around climate stuff. And I got up on stage and said, you know, we're fucked as a as a society. We're going to collapse in a short amount of time in a catastrophic kind of way, or if we're lucky, we can manage some kind of gradual recalibration, and a lot of that takes changing our expectations around energy use and consumption habits, particularly for those of us in the Western Hemisphere, or sort of, Western society, and also, I don't think we really, as a society, got the urgency yet of what's coming. And when you look into the stats on stuff and realise how close we're getting to this collapse of all those things, and we saw, a shade of that in the pandemic, but what's coming is going to create a lot of pain for a lot of people. So can we do things differently? And I really want to support those individuals and groups who are prepared to put their bodies on the line and go to jail, or put themselves in harm's way often, to get the message through, to shift the discussion. I just get so despondent seeing the media sort of stories on these issues that really avoid the pending, it sounds all very doomsday, but I just look at the evidence, and I can't see a way forward that there's going to be a happy future. I really feel for future generations, not just humans, but every other species has a right to exist, but certainly our kids and grandkids. The world that they're inheriting is just going to be so different, and so I don't know. I get quite kind of that's we've got to do more about that stuff.
This leads a lot back to that mental health discussion we're having earlier, right? I feel from this year and the amount of challenges that the community's been through, that we've been through personally in relationships, that I've got to the point where I'm ready to hit the eject button on living in a region that is the first in New Zealand to really continually suffer these events. That's the impending future for all of the country, right? Not just us. Yeah. So if this is what it looks like now, I'm already ready to jump ship, and be like, there's got to be something better out there. Do you see your brain's trust and your wealthy just disappear, and still own everything but leave? And then are we going to retreat to start calmer shores just to watch the world burn? Is that kind of how it's going?
Well, I start wondering where those calmer shores are, and there will be places that feel the effects slower than others, but everyone's going to feel it in different ways in different places. So other than the Mars shoot, which is a pipe dream, I'm not sure who's going to escape really. But those with resources will be able to protect themselves for longer and find, move the mobile in a way that those without resources are going to struggle. What gives me a little hope in this region is we do have a good proportion of our communities that have a degree of subsistence lifestyle still, where they hunt and fish and can grow kai to a lesser degree perhaps, and that will become more challenging as the climate shifts. There may be some new crops that we can grow that we haven't been able to before, bananas and pineapples and things, but the weather events will make and are making human habitation, let alone industry and things, tenuous, and we may end up having sporadic access to a lot of locations in the region, so that it's becomes seasonal again, that we can get in and out and that sort of stuff, and that's difficult to imagine, but not that hard these days. Sort of coming down today from Ruatoria, I think we went through 6 or 7 road works, and the government, again, sort of that focus on infrastructure, I get it, but if we're just relying on roading infrastructure to keep the place working, we're ignoring the natural infrastructure that we've removed, that if we addressed would reduce the damage that we've seen to the 70 odd bridges in the region and the roads that have disappeared and things. There'll just be less water making its way into those catchments to cause that damage, let alone the woody debris that exacerbates it. So I think there's things we can do. It's not all a lost cause yet, but it's certainly becoming and will become harder to live in places like Tairāwhiti, which for whatever reason, we get some great weather, but we also get the extremes, and some of those weather events seem to hang around the coast a lot longer than other places where they blow through.
So there are things we can do, you say. What would they be? What would your checklist of actions be if you had 2 or 3 that you could just start knocking off?
Yeah, I think that task, the exercise the council's doing to work out what is truly sustainable in what places is critical, and getting that right and getting the science really accurate on that.
That's the right tree, right place, but actually putting it into effect, not just...
Yeah, but I think we've got to do that first. We've got to do that assessment and build consensus around it. No good, a few of us saying this is the way to go, and we've got to change overnight, and others saying, no, we're never going to change. And it's been interesting since Gabrielle, seeing some of those attitudes, as you alluded to, shifting from people who have been staunch, you can't change us, we're always going to be farmers here, or forestry is the way forward. Say, actually, yep, there's mature pines that are not suitable for erosion-prone, land, and with mudstone and papa underneath that are collapsing into these gullies, and let alone bare pasture. So, and they're saying, yep, we've got to change. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we're open to the conversation. So I think building that consensus is really critical, and getting good science to underpin it. It'll be the interpretation of that, but that exercise is the first step, so that we can get agreement about the way forward. And then, as you say, putting that into action, finding a way to fund the pest control and the fencing and the planting, or the regeneration, is critical. And then the investment in the research and development for new industry to emerge around those native forests, and working out what a plantation of kānuka or karamu or whatever it is looks like, that is good for the land, but can also create some jobs. We need that as a priority from central government that can de-risk it for business, not take all the risk out of it, but certainly support with publicly funded research that's publicly available to reduce the risk and help companies to quickly pivot, or new ventures to become established. I worry about some of the sort of new ventures around slash conversion to energy, given that it relies on a unsustainable land practice, but I also appreciate that a lot of those pine trees aren't going anywhere quickly, or if they are, it's only into waterways, and if we can find a way to move them on. So that research around transitional forests is also a priority from my perspective, to work out if these companies walk off the land and out of the region because they're like, the rules are too tight, we can't make it work anymore. It was marginal when the rules were really relaxed, that were totally unsustainable. What are we as a region going to do about those pine trees, and have a good evidence base, again, the science on how you re-establish natives where there's been pine plantations is critical. It's much easier in some ways to do it where there's pasture and not pines that are popping up wilding and pampas grass and things.
Yeah. So the just transition element sounds difficult. Like, How do you think there's an approach to that that's going to be manageable, not just across Tairāwhiti, but obviously this transition is going to be national?
Yep. And I think again it's that participatory process, so making sure that whatever we do, it's not just council and iwi that kind of make the decisions. We've got to get landowners to buy into that process and feel like they're part of the planning and the design. And that's not just for this region, but everywhere, I think. And we've seen what happens when people are excluded from those processes and the polarisation that can happen and the stagnation that we can get when there's not consensus about a way forward. So again, taking the politics out of some of those processes, understanding that there's massive economic implications for them, and working with industry to work through some of that. So, particularly farmers and foresters who invested in good faith that their industry had a right to exist in this region, and will soon be told most of it can't happen because you're either in an erosion zone or a flood zone. There's a degree of compensation or some incentives that are needed to support them so that we don't get total collapse overnight. But a rapid transition needs to happen. It can't be an incremental over decades. It's got to, 10, 15 years, we're going to need to see some massive change.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be at least over one cycle of forestry, right? Because all of it needs to be assessed before replanting of.
I think that we've seen investment drop for replanting, rightly so. But there's lots of reasons why we shouldn't let pine get to a mature age. Now, if you look, you drive up Ihungia Road and see the collapse of whole forests into gullies of mature trees. They're just too shallow rooting, too heavy on top, and so if we can cut them off at no older than 15 years or 10 years, and it'll be easier to transition them into natives. But that's going to take a lot of money. It's a difficult future ahead, that's for sure. But one that also comes with opportunity. You mentioned earlier the quantity of unstable, unsuitable land in the region. I can't remember the percentage you said, but sort of what volume of forestry do you think will need to be reduced? Because we had approximately 3 million tonne over the port going pre-cyclone. Is that a 2/3 reduction? Is it a 4/5 reduction? So, and the numbers change and not always up to date publicly, but my understanding is there could be around, certainly at least half of the region has been in pasture, and I think that's possibly dropped a little under half, but and a quarter has been in pine, and probably is getting closer to a third. And the pines tended to focus on the most erosion-prone land. And again, that's why council are doing this exercise to work out what is actually suitable. But my guess would be that most of that land is unsuitable for pine trees to be growing on to maturity. And there's sort of talk of carbon farms where you don't harvest, but even letting those trees get tall is risky. So potentially, all of it needs to stop. There'll be some land that it is still suitable for potentially, but whether that's economic to have such small
packages of land.
And those, I guess, the farm foresters have shown you can do small wood lots, and you don't have to clear fell 4,000 hectares at once to be economic as they have in back of Tokomaru Bay. But there may be some option, and other species. I think we need to move from pine to other exotics, and there's some options there. Perhaps, of course, ideally it'll all be native. And we just spent the last couple of days with the guy from up north who's running the tōtara industry trial up there, and they're milling 80-year-old tōtara that's worth 10 times what a pine log is. So again, if we're prepared to sort of play the long game, invest in some of those species, and invest the R&D that's been invested in pine into natives, shift the priorities of scion, then we can optimise those native species for production in a selectively harvested system. So
Yep.
yeah, lots of opportunities.
So I guess that's the hopes for 2024 is better science then.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah. New science agenda, new minister. Hopefully there's a good commitment to those things that are important to this region.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Manu, I could talk to you forever about this stuff. It's really, really engaging, and thank you for coming in with your knowledge and your insights today. It's really valuable, and I'm sure that there's going to be some really good takeouts from this conversation that we can pursue in the future.
Cool.
Obviously, I'm looking forward to your release of your content coming up, so we can get involved and see what plans are coming forward. Look, so to our audience, please follow and contribute to the Exchange Cafe at exchangecafe.co.nz because together we have the solutions. Mā te wā. Cheers, bro. Thank you.
Sweet. That was fun.